Michael and I, we're in love, and there's nothing to do about it. There's nothing to say.
What I didn't know is that you were going to get so sexy.
I think Michael Jackson.
At 81 years old, Diana Ross sits in her Beverly Hills mansion, her hands trembling slightly as she holds a cup of tea that's long gone cold. For the first time in over a decade, she's ready to speak about Michael Jackson. Not the sanitized version she's given reporters for years, not the careful diplomatic answers that protected both their legacies. The truth, the raw, devastating truth that she's carried like a stone in her chest since June 25, 2009. "I've been a coward," she whispers, her voice still carrying that unmistakable power that made her a legend. "For 14 years I've let the world believe what they wanted to believe about Michael and me, but I'm dying and I can't take these secrets to my grave." Diana Ross has nothing left to lose. Her career is cemented in history, her children are grown, her reputation is untouchable. And that freedom, she says, is what finally allows her to speak about the man who loved her in ways that terrified her, obsessed over her in ways that destroyed him, and needed her in ways that ultimately killed him. The first secret she reveals cuts straight to the bone. 2 days before Michael Jackson died, he called her. Not his mother, Catherine, not his children, Diana Ross. It was 3 a.m, Los Angeles time. She almost didn't answer. She'd been avoiding his calls for months because each conversation left her feeling like she was being pulled into quicksand. "Diana," his voice was barely a whisper, she remembers. "I need you to know something. I need you to know that everything I've ever done, every song I've ever written, every time I've stepped on a stage, it was all for you. And I'm tired, I'm so tired of loving someone who can never love me back." She begged him to call a doctor, to reach out to someone who could help him. But Michael laughed, that hollow, broken laugh that haunted his final years. "You still don't understand, do you? You're the only medicine I've ever needed, and you've never been available." That phone call lasted 17 minutes. Diana remembers every word because she recorded it. Not intentionally. Her phone had been acting up, automatically saving voicemails and calls. She discovered the recording weeks after his funeral, and it nearly destroyed her. Because in those 17 minutes, Michael Jackson laid out a confession so raw, so desperate, that Diana knew she could never let the world hear it. Until now. "He told me about the pills," she says, her voice cracking for the first time. Not just that he was taking them, but why. He said the only time the pain stopped, the pain of wanting me, was when he was so medicated he couldn't think straight. He said he'd rather be unconscious than spend one more day loving me. The world knows Michael Jackson died from acute propofol intoxication. What the world doesn't know is that, according to Diana Ross, he'd been slowly killing himself with painkillers and sleeping medication for years, trying to numb an obsession that consumed him from the inside out. But the phone call revelation is just the beginning. Diana's real bombshell is what she did with that recording. She didn't destroy it. She didn't hide it. She gave it to someone who promised to keep it safe until the time was right to reveal the truth about Michael Jackson's final days. "I thought I was protecting him by staying quiet," Diana explains. "His family, his children, his fans, they needed to remember him as the king of pop, not as a broken man who couldn't let go of a love that was never meant to be. But silence is just another form of betrayal, isn't it?" The weight of carrying Michael's secrets has physically changed her, she admits. The guilt of wondering if she could have saved him, if she'd just said the words he needed to hear. The horror of knowing that every time he performed Dirty Diana, he was singing about her, not to some imaginary groupie, but to her, begging her to understand what she was doing to him. Diana Ross has decided to break her silence because she believes the world needs to understand what really killed Michael Jackson. It wasn't just the drugs, it wasn't just the pressure, it wasn't just the scandals or the isolation. It was love, unrequited, obsessive, desperate love that consumed him for over 30 years, and she's about to prove it. Diana's voice hardens as she delves into the details that no biography has ever captured, no documentary has ever revealed. "People think they know about Michael's feelings for me because of that Ebony interview in 1982. What they don't know is that interview was just the tip of the iceberg. By then, he'd already been stalking me for years. The word stalking hangs in the air like smoke. Diana doesn't use it lightly. She explains how it started innocently enough after The Wiz wrapped in 1978. A few phone calls, some flowers sent to her dressing room, sweet gestures that gradually became suffocating. He would call my hotel room no matter what city I was in, she recalls. I never told him my travel schedule, but somehow he always knew. Paris, London, Detroit. The phone would ring at exactly midnight, his time. He said he needed to hear my voice before he could sleep. The gifts were next, not just flowers or jewelry, but obsessive tokens that revealed how closely he was watching her life. A first-edition book of poetry that she'd mentioned loving in a radio interview he wasn't even supposed to have heard. A vintage dress identical to one she'd worn in a magazine photo shoot, a custom-made music box that played Ease On Down the Road, their duet from The Wiz, but slowed down to sound like a funeral dirge. Each gift came with a note, Diana says. Always the same handwriting, always the same signature. From your eternal admirer, NJ. But the messages got stranger, more desperate. He would write about dreams he'd had about me, conversations we'd supposedly had that never happened. He was living in a fantasy world where I was already his. The breaking point came in 1985, just weeks before Diana's wedding to Arne Ness Jr. Michael showed up at her Beverly Hills home unannounced. Not at the front door, in her backyard. He'd somehow gotten past her security, climbed over a wall, and was standing by her pool at 2 a.m. He was just standing there, in the moonlight, fully dressed in one of those military-style jackets he loved, crying. Not sobbing, just tears streaming down his face. When I asked him how long he'd been there, he said hours. He'd been watching me through my kitchen window, watching me make dinner, watching me live my life without him in it. That night, Michael made an offer that still haunts Diana. He pulled out a ring, not an engagement ring, but something even more disturbing. A wedding band that matched one he was wearing on his own finger. He told her he'd had them custom-made months earlier, that he wore his every day, and that all she had to do was put hers on and they could disappear together. He had it all planned out, Diana remembers, her voice barely above a whisper. A house in Switzerland where no one would find us, new identities. He said we could live as husband and wife and the world would never know. He was serious, completely, terrifyingly serious. For the first time in their relationship, Diana saw the true depth of Michael's obsession. This wasn't love, it was possession. He didn't want to be with Diana Ross, the woman. He wanted to own Diana Ross, the symbol, the fantasy he'd constructed in his mind since he was 9 years old. I should have called the police, she admits now. I should have gotten him help. But he looked so broken, so lost. I just kept thinking about that little boy I'd met at Motown, and I couldn't reconcile him with this stranger in my backyard begging me to run away with him. Instead, Diana made a choice that she believes saved her life but sealed Michael's fate. She looked him in the eyes and said the words that would haunt them both forever. Michael, if you truly love me, you'll let me go. You'll let me be happy with someone else. He put the ring back in his pocket, nodded once, and walked away. But he didn't let her go. He never let her go. And the shrine at Neverland? Diana knew about it because Michael had shown it to her himself. Diana's hands shake as she reveals why she buried this story for decades, why she smiled politely at award shows while sitting next to the man who turned her into his personal obsession. The reason isn't what anyone would expect. It wasn't about protecting her own reputation or career. It was about preventing something far more sinister. Michael told me what would happen if I ever went public, she says, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. He said Berry Gordy had files on everyone at Motown, compromising photos, financial irregularities, family secrets that could destroy careers and lives. Michael claimed he'd inherited those files when he left the label, and he'd use them if I ever tried to expose him. But the threats weren't just professional. In 1987, 2 years after her wedding, Diana received a package with no return address. Inside was a photograph of her daughter Tracy, then 15, walking to school. On the back, in Michael's distinctive handwriting, "Beautiful children should be protected. I know how to keep them safe." That's when I knew I wasn't dealing with the Michael I'd grown up with in the industry, Diana explains. This was someone who'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. He wasn't just obsessed with me anymore, he was willing to involve my children to keep me quiet. Diana made a deal with the devil that day. She would never publicly reject him, never tell the true story of his obsession, and in return, he would stay away from her family. For years, it worked. Michael channeled his fixation into his music, his performances, his increasingly bizarre public persona. But the distance only fed his fantasy. He would send me copies of every song before it was released, she reveals. Not just Dirty Diana, dozens of songs that were supposedly about other women, but contained coded messages meant for me. The Way You Make Me Feel, Liberian Girl, even Black or White had lyrics that referenced private conversations we'd had years earlier. His entire catalogue became a love letter that only I could fully decode. The shrine at Neverland wasn't just a collection of photos and memorabilia. According to Diana, it was a twisted recreation of moments from their past, mixed with fantasy scenarios that existed only in Michael's mind. He'd invited her to see it in 1991, calling it his Sanctuary of Truth. There were photos of us together, but he doctored them, she says, her voice filled with disgust. Pictures from award shows where he'd removed other people and made it look like we were alone together. Wedding photos where he'd replaced Arne's face with his own. It was like walking into the mind of someone who'd completely lost touch with reality. But what terrified Diana most was a handwritten letter displayed in the center of the shrine, framed like a sacred text. It was addressed to my future wife Diana and detailed their life together, their children, their home, their daily routines, as if it was already happening. The letter was dated 1983, 2 years before her actual wedding, but Michael had written it as if they'd been married for decades. He was living an entire parallel life in his head, Diana explains, and the shrine was proof that he truly believed it was real, that someday I would see the truth and join him in his fantasy. The breaking point came when Michael's behavior began affecting his relationship with his own children. Diana learned through mutual friends that Prince, Paris, and Blanket had been asking about Aunt Diana, but referring to her as if she was their stepmother. Michael had been showing them photos from the shrine, telling them stories about their real family. That's when I realized my silence wasn't protecting anyone anymore, Diana says. It was enabling a delusion that was poisoning everyone around him, including innocent children who deserved better than to be raised on lies. Diana tried to reach out to Catherine Jackson, to the family, to anyone who might intervene. But Michael's inner circle was either too terrified or too financially dependent on him to challenge his version of reality. So Diana made another deal, this time with herself. She would wait until after his death to tell the truth. She owed him that much, she thought. She never imagined he would die so soon, or that her silence would become another burden she'd carry to her grave. Diana Ross takes a deep breath, steadying herself for what she knows will be the most damaging revelation of all. At 81, she's decided that some truths are too important to die with her, no matter who they destroy in the process. Michael's final confession wasn't just about loving me, she begins, her voice steady now, resolved. It was about what that love had driven him to do, and why he believed he deserved to die. In that 17-minute phone call 2 days before his death, Michael Jackson didn't just talk about his obsession with Diana Ross, he confessed to orchestrating events that had shaped both their lives for decades. The coincidences that brought them together at industry events, the random encounters that always seemed to happen when Diana was at her most vulnerable, none of it was accidental. He told me he'd been paying people to keep tabs on me since the early 80s, Diana reveals. Security guards, hotel staff, even some of my own assistants. He knew my schedule better than I did. He knew about my relationships before they became serious, my family problems before they became public, my career decisions before I'd fully made them. But Michael's manipulations went deeper than surveillance. In 1996, when Diana's marriage to Arne Ness Jr. was falling apart, she received a call from a man claiming to be a private investigator. He told her he had evidence that Arne was having affairs, that he was hiding money, that her prenup was invalid. The information was detailed, damaging, and ultimately led to her divorce. 24 years later, Michael told me the truth, Diana says, her voice breaking. There was no private investigator. It was Michael's people feeding me information, some real, some fabricated, to destroy my marriage. He admitted to spending over $2 million to break up my family because he couldn't stand watching me be happy with someone else. The revelation gets worse. Diana's career struggles in the 90s, the cancelled tours, the record deals that mysteriously fell through. Michael confessed to sabotaging them all. He'd used his influence, his connections, his money, to ensure that Diana Ross never got too far away from his orbit of control. He said he was sorry, Diana continues, but then he said something that made my blood run cold. He said, "At least now you know how much you meant to me. At least now you understand that everything I destroyed for love." But Michael's final confession revealed something even more disturbing about Dirty Diana. The song wasn't just inspired by Diana Ross, it was a threat directed at her. Michael told her he'd written it after learning about her relationship with Gene Simmons from Kiss in the mid-80s. The lyrics weren't about groupies chasing rock stars. They were about what Michael believed Diana had become, a woman who seduced men for power and fame. He played me the original version over the phone that night, Diana remembers. The lyrics were different, cruder. They mentioned specific details about my relationships that no one else could have known. The version the world heard was sanitized, but the message was clear. He was calling me a whore, musically, and making millions doing it. Diana Ross finally breaks down as she reveals the most devastating truth of all. Michael Jackson's death wasn't an accident, or even negligence. According to his final confession, it was suicide, carefully planned and methodically executed to look like an overdose. He told me he'd been researching propofol for months, she sobs. He knew exactly how much would kill him. He knew Dr. Murray's history, his financial problems, his desperation. He chose Murray specifically because he was the perfect fall guy, someone who would administer the fatal dose without realizing he was being used as a murder weapon. Michael's suicide wasn't about the mounting lawsuits or the comeback tour pressure. It was about Diana Ross finally threatening to go public with their history. In early 2009, Diana had contacted a publisher about writing her autobiography. She decided to include everything: the stalking, the manipulation, the years of psychological abuse. Michael found out through his network of spies and informants. He said he'd rather die as a legend than live to see me destroy the fantasy he'd built around our relationship, Diana explains. He said the world would never believe me anyway, that they'd always choose the romantic story over the ugly truth. And he was right, wasn't he? For 14 years, no one questioned the official narrative. But Michael Jackson's final manipulation was ensuring Diana Ross would carry the guilt of his death forever. In his last words to her on that phone call, he said, "When you hear that I'm gone, you'll know it was because of you. You'll know that all I ever wanted was to love you, and you'll spend the rest of your life wondering if you could have saved me." Diana Ross has lived with that guilt for 14 years. The weight of wondering if one phone call to authorities could have prevented his death. The horror of realizing that her silence had enabled his delusions until they literally killed him. The shame of knowing that millions of fans around the world were mourning a man who had been, in her experience, a master manipulator and stalker. "I'm telling this story now because Michael was wrong about one thing," Diana says, wiping away tears. "People deserve the truth, even when it's ugly, especially when it's ugly. His children deserve to know who their father really was. His fans deserve to understand what obsession can do to a human being, and I deserve to stop carrying his secrets." Diana Ross ends with a warning. The music industry hasn't changed. There are still powerful men who think love gives them the right to control, to manipulate, to destroy. Michael Jackson wasn't unique, he was just the most successful. What do you think about Diana's shocking revelations? Do you believe celebrity obsession can justify these actions? Share your thoughts in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories that expose the dark side of fame. The truth is always stranger than fiction.